Hi! Today we're going to talk about skill generalization. We're going to talk about what generalization is, why we care, and how to program for it. The technical definition of generalization is the occurrence of relevant behavior under different non-training conditions without scheduling of the same events in those conditions that had been scheduled in the training conditions. So what does that mean? What that means in your clinical practice is that the behaviors that you're programming for occur at other times and other places that are relevant when you'd expect those behaviors to occur. So for example, when you're teaching something like toothbrushing, you're going to teach your client, your student, to brush their teeth with their toothbrush in their bathroom at their sink, and you're going to use whatever methods that you use for teaching that skill. You might use visual supports, you might use physical prompts, you might use timers, you might use all of the above, activity schedules, whatever it is that you're going to do to help that student to brush their teeth to criterion. Then, once you've taught that client how to brush their teeth at criterion level, all of your data shows 100% toothbrushing, then you're going to want to assess skill generalization. You can assess generalization across different dimensions. You can assess across subjects, which isn't relevant for if you're teaching toothbrushing. You might assess generalization across settings, across instructors, across different times of the day. So you pick what dimension you're going to assess generalization across. Maybe you say that toothbrushing is relevant to assess generalization across settings. So after you teach your client to brush their teeth to criterion, the toothbrushing looks great. You're going to ask that client to then go to their downstairs bathroom and brush their teeth there. What you might find is that that client is no longer brushing their teeth to criterion. So we're going to talk about some ways to program to support your clients in showing skill acquisition and skill generalization across those different dimensions. The first method that we're going to talk about for programming skill generalization is sequential modification. This is a really useful one, and it's pretty easy to use. So what you're going to start, I'm going to use some office supplies to help make my points. So here, the first example we're going to use is we're going to use markers. So we have this marker. We're going to teach that this is a marker. We're going to teach that to criterion. We're going to show our clients this is a marker. Touch the marker. What is this? It's a marker. We're teaching marker when compared to this. This is a phone, but this is a marker. This is still a marker. When compared to this, this one is still the marker. So we taught marker. 100% our data says that this one is the marker. So then what we're going to do is we're going to collect some data wherein we ask the client about this one. Touch the marker. We might find that skill generalization has not occurred. This marker is different enough from this marker that we did not get skill generalization. Then within sequential modification, we've collected all of our data to show that skill acquisition for this marker is at 100%. We've finished our data point that says that this generalization probe was not 100%. We did not get skill acquisition. Then this stimulus becomes the training stimulus. We're going to teach to this one. What is this? It's a marker. Maybe we'll use a physical prompt. Touch the marker. This one's the marker. Marker, marker, marker. This one's the marker. Then within sequential modification, we're going to assess generalization across another stimulus. This is the generalization stimulus now. Maybe we assess generalization with this stimulus and we find that we're still not getting skill generalization. This then becomes the training stimulus. We're going to teach this one as a marker. This one's a marker. Touch the marker. Here's a marker. We're going to continue to do that across all of the relevant stimuli that are within that stimulus class. This one's a marker, this one's a marker, this one's also a marker. These are all markers. We even have some markers that look a little bit different. This one's a marker. This one's a marker. These are all markers. and we introduce the generalization stimuli one at a time within sequential modification. So when we assess generalization, if generalization has not occurred, that new stimulus then becomes the training stimulus, and you use it for teaching. The way that you'll be able to say that skill generalization has occurred when using sequential modification is when you begin to introduce your generalization stimuli and you're getting data points at 100%. Then you can say across however many stimuli that skill generalization has occurred. Alright, so that's sequential modification. Within sequential modification, you're teaching to all of the relevant stimuli sequentially. The next example that I'm going to use is the next procedure that we're going to talk about is training sufficient exemplars. This one is similar to sequential modification, but it's not exactly the same. So within training sufficient exemplars, within your initial training set, you're not going to have just one marker, because remember, within sequential modification, we started with just the one. We just had the gray marker, and that was it. And then we brought in all the other colors as we went along. With training sufficient exemplars, we're going to teach to a diverse set of markers to start out with. These are all markers. This one's a marker, this one's a marker, this one's a marker. They're all markers. We're teaching to them against the phone, we're teaching to them against the Post-it. This one's a marker regardless of what it's sitting next to, and so are these. These are all markers. This is in our initial training set, right? So once we've taught to all of these training stimuli and we have data to show that the client is responding correctly and independently to all of these as markers, then we're going to introduce our generalization. This one's generalization. It's not in the training set. It's a different non-training stimulus. And we're going to introduce this one to assess generalization. Or we might even have a generalization set. All of these markers were not in the initial training set. These were the initial training set, and these are the generalization set. So then we're going to assess generalization with these. The process behind teaching sufficient exemplars is that you're going to teach to enough examples of markerness that the client is going to be able to respond correctly to a marker even though the specific ones hadn't been trained. So these still have the same features. These ones still have caps. You can take them off. Can I? You can take them off. You can draw with them. They look similar, not exactly the same, but these are all, within the stimulus class of markers, and you're trying to teach to all of the relevant aspects of this stimulus class within the training set, so that when you bring in the generalization set, you might be able to show that skill generalization has occurred. It's training sufficient exemplars. So then, the next one that we're going to talk about, also very, very relevant for whatever way that you're going to teach to generalization, is introducing to naturally maintaining contingencies. This one's a little bit different from sequential modification and from training sufficient exemplars because this one has to do with the contingencies. It's less to do with the actual features of the object, that it has a cap, that it's brightly colored, maybe it says Crayola on it, although not all markers say Crayola on it. You're going to teach to a contingency. So the way that you might shift a naturally maintaining contingency is that if you're teaching to this is a marker, you might always, while teaching, teach a client to draw something with a marker. If we're teaching that this is a marker, we might teach it in this way. Look, I drew this flower. This is a marker. I drew the flower with the marker. So that in a different setting with a different instructor, you might say, what is this? Student might say it's a marker, because then the contingency has been that they're able to draw something with the marker. Another good example that I can think of for this that really kind of exemplifies bringing skills into contact with naturally maintaining contingencies is if you're teaching to doing a puzzle. when you're teaching a student to do a puzzle, there are a lot of different components. You have to manipulate the pieces, you have to turn them, you have to see if they fit, and then try a different piece and maybe see if that fits, if the first piece was not correct. But then at the end, your puzzle makes a picture. So if you have your client talk about the picture in the puzzle, you might be able to teach to skill generalization across settings, across instructors, across puzzles, and help that client to display the skill of completing their puzzle because they're interested in seeing how that puzzle turns out and then is able to talk about the picture in the puzzle. If you've not completed the puzzle, it's difficult to talk about the picture. Maybe you can talk about individual pieces, but it's not the same as talking about the whole picture. So that's a naturally maintaining contingency that when you've completed a puzzle, you then get to talk about the picture. The reason that it's important to bring skills that you're teaching into contact with naturally maintaining contingencies is that you often see a lack of skill generalization across environments or across instructors, across materials, when the contingencies are not clear or it is clear that the contingencies will be different in the natural environment than they are within the training condition. So if you've taught a skill, for example, doing a puzzle under really tight stimulus conditions, you're in a classroom or at a desk, and you're in a classroom or at a desk, you're training really, really tightly to those conditions to ensure that that student is going to make skill acquisition, then the less relevant aspects of that training condition may come under stimulus control. So it might be about an instructor delivering tokens that's maintaining that student's behavior over time and over different stimuli. So if you take that student and you put them in a different classroom or with a different instructor, that student may anticipate that the reinforcement that had been in place may not necessarily be in place in that new environment or with that new instructor. So it's important to kind of move forward with bringing that student into contact with naturally maintaining reinforcement. If the student's in a different classroom with a different instructor, maybe this instructor doesn't know about their particular system of reinforcement. But if every time that student completes a puzzle, they get to look at the picture, it's a new picture, they get to talk about it, or whatever it is, that's a naturally maintaining reinforcer that is available always when the student completes a puzzle. And it makes it more likely that that student is going to display skill generalization across those relevant dimensions. Because when you're teaching something like a puzzle, you want a fully generalized leisure skill. You want that student to be able to do a puzzle at home at their kitchen table while someone is cooking dinner. You want them to do it in their downtime after homework. You want them to be able to do it in grandma's house. You want them to be able to do it in their bedroom, downstairs, on the road, in the doctor's office, anywhere that a leisure skill would be relevant to have. All right, that brings us to something related, that is to use indiscriminable contingencies so while you're teaching. So in the same way that you're going to want those naturally maintaining contingencies to be discriminable, that whenever you finish that puzzle, you're going to get to look at the picture. The training contingencies that you're using, anything that you're doing with praise that you're delivering, anything through an individualized motivational system like a token board or a contract system, those kinds of things are best to be made at least a little bit indiscriminable, because like we talked about, when you bring a student into different environment or with a different instructor with different materials, it might be clear to that student at that time that during that generalization probe, those contingencies that had been maintaining their behavior are not going to be in place anymore, and so they may not display that skill generalization. The very last thing that we're going to talk about in this clip is to program common stimuli. This one is important when you're looking to really bring those skills that you're teaching into the natural environment so that students can really be functioning independently within their natural environment. So to program common stimuli means to bring stimuli from the natural environment that are always going to be present in the natural environment when you want the skill to generalize. Those stimuli are always going to be present during the training and during the generalization. So let's use the example of writing your name. If you're going to write your name, you always need a writing implement and a piece of paper, right? Regardless of what it is. Maybe it's not a piece of paper, maybe it's a whiteboard or a chalkboard, but you're going to need something to write with and something to write on. Those are common stimuli. Those are naturally occurring common stimuli. So you can't write your name just with your finger on nothing. You know, if you're going to expect a student to write their name, they're going to have to take something, write their name, right? An example that I can think of that would be a way to program for common stimuli for students that need a little extra help to gain skills and make skill acquisition would be if you are going to teach a skill using a visual support or an activity schedule. Let's say you're teaching typing from a model. Let's say you're teaching typing a web address from a model. What you might use to program for common stimuli would be to use a text cue. So that text cue could follow the student from different computers on different keyboards with different instructors. So regardless of where the student is or what computer they're working on, that student may be able to type the web address because the textual cue, just like this, let's do www.youtube.com. And that student's textual cue is this on this post-it right here. And this post-it gets taken off, and when this student is typing, that post-it is sitting there on their computer. Maybe it's on the top, maybe it's on the bottom, wherever it is. This is the textual cue that's going to help that student to type the web address correctly. So that's programming a common stimulus, right? So when you're assessing generalization, you bring in a different instructor and you say, okay, this student has learned to type a web address. I want you, different instructor, to ask the student to type the web address, and we'll be assessing generalization. Or we bring that student to a different computer. It's a different keyboard. It's not a laptop keyboard. It's one of the ones that come out. There's a higher action on the buttons. You have to press harder. But still, that common stimulus is present to program common stimuli to help that student display skill generalization. So those are just a couple ways that we're going to be able to program for skill generalization. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.